"Release my dad, and I'll make you walk," the little girl said firmly to the wheelchair-bound judge. The entire courtroom erupted in laughter, but when she placed her hands on his legs, something happened that froze everyone's mockery forever. The Superior Court of Justice had never been so packed on a Tuesday morning. Every seat was occupied, people stood pressed against the walls, and the air conditioning struggled to combat the heat generated by hundreds of bodies crammed into a space designed for half that number. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, whispers creating a low hum that made the wooden panels vibrate. Judge Malcolm Thornton wheeled himself slowly through the side entrance, his wheelchair making a soft squeaking sound that somehow cut through the murmuring crowd. He was a man in his early 60s, known throughout the city not for his judicial wisdom but for his iron-fisted rulings and complete intolerance for what he called emotional manipulation in his courtroom. The accident that had confined him to a wheelchair years ago had only hardened his already stern demeanor. "All rise," the bailiff announced, though Judge Thornton gestured impatiently for everyone to sit. "Case number 2847B, the State versus Michael Hayes. Charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to defraud a charitable organization." The heavy doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and Michael Hayes entered flanked by 2 guards. He walked with his head down, the prison uniform marking him as guilty in the eyes of many present before a single word of testimony had been heard. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't Michael himself. It was the small figure that suddenly broke through the gallery barrier. "Daddy!" The voice was high-pitched, desperate, filled with a love so pure that even the most cynical observers felt something stir in their chests. Emma Hayes was 8 years old, though her small frame made her appear younger. She had rushed past the bailiff with a speed that surprised everyone, her arms outstretched toward her father. The guards instinctively moved to block her, but Michael's face, which had been a mask of defeated resignation, suddenly crumbled with emotion. "Emma, sweetheart, you shouldn't be here." Michael's voice broke as he spoke, tears streaming down his face. "Please, baby, go back to Aunt Rachel." Order in my courtroom!" Judge Thornton's voice boomed with authority as he slammed his gavel. "Someone remove that child immediately." But Emma had already reached her father, wrapping her small arms around his waist with such fierce determination that the guards hesitated. In that moment, everyone in the courtroom saw not a criminal and a child, but a father and daughter whose bond transcended the bars of accusation and judgment. "Sir, I'll handle this," a woman's voice called from the gallery. Rachel Foster, Michael's sister, rushed forward with an apologetic expression. She was a nurse who had taken time off work to support her brother, already drowning in legal fees she couldn't afford. "Emma, honey, remember what we talked about? We have to let Daddy speak to the judge." "But Aunt Rachel, they're saying Daddy did bad things." Emma's voice was loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. "He didn't. He would never steal from sick children. Tell them, Daddy." The mention of sick children sent a ripple through the crowd. The case had made headlines for weeks. Michael Hayes, former financial director of the Children's Hope Foundation, accused of embezzling over $2 million meant for pediatric cancer treatments. The evidence seemed damning. Bank transfers, falsified documents, luxury purchases that didn't match his modest salary. "That's enough!" Judge Thornton's patience had evaporated. "Bailiff Morrison, remove the child now or I'll hold everyone in contempt." "No, please," Michael pleaded, his voice hoarse. "She's just scared. Give me 1 minute to calm her down." "You don't get to make demands in my courtroom, Mr. Hayes," the judge responded coldly. "You're accused of stealing from dying children. The very presence of your daughter here is a manipulation tactic that I will not tolerate." The prosecutor, a sharp-featured man named Gerald Hutchinson, stood with barely concealed satisfaction. "Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of emotional theater we expected from the defense. Mr. Hayes has shown no remorse, no accountability, and now he's using his own child as a prop." Emma's head snapped toward the prosecutor with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone her age. "My daddy isn't a prop, and he didn't steal anything. You're all lying!" The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Some people were moved by the child's devotion, others scandalized by what they saw as a calculated performance. Judge Thornton's face darkened with anger. "Young lady, you are this close to being removed by force. I suggest you let your aunt take you out of here before I have security do it." But Emma didn't move. Instead, she turned to face the judge directly, and something in her eyes made several people in the front row lean forward. There was a certainty there, a knowing that seemed far beyond her years. "Judge, sir," Emma's voice had changed, becoming calmer but somehow more commanding. "Will you let me say something before they take me away? Please, just 1 minute." Judge Thornton studied the child with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. In his decades on the bench, he had seen every manipulation, every trick, every attempt to sway judgment with emotion. But there was something about this little girl that gave him pause. "1 minute," he said curtly, "but make it quick." Emma took a deep breath, her small hands gripping her father's prison uniform. "My daddy worked at the Children's Hospital Foundation because my little brother Nathan had cancer. He died 2 years ago when he was only 5. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. This detail hadn't been in any of the media coverage. Rachel Foster wiped tears from her eyes, nodding to confirm the truth of Emma's words. "Daddy saw how much money families needed for treatment," Emma continued, her voice steady despite the tears running down her cheeks. "He saw kids die because they couldn't afford medicine. He promised Nathan before he died that he would help other children. That's why he worked there. Not to steal, to help." "That's very touching," Prosecutor Hutchinson interrupted, his voice dripping with skepticism. "But good intentions don't explain $2 million missing from the foundation's accounts, do they?" Emma turned to look at the prosecutor with such direct clarity that the man actually took a step back. "My daddy didn't take that money. Mr. Roland Ashford did." The name hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. Roland Ashford was the CEO and founder of the Children's Hope Foundation, a beloved public figure who had been praised by governors, senators, and celebrities for his humanitarian work. He was the star witness against Michael Hayes. "This is outrageous," Prosecutor Hutchinson exploded. "Your Honor, this child is making baseless accusations against the prosecution's primary witness." But Judge Thornton held up his hand. Something about the way Emma had spoken the name, with such absolute certainty, had triggered his judicial instincts. "How do you know this, young lady?" "Because I heard them talking," Emma replied. "Mr. Ashford came to our house late one night, weeks before they arrested Daddy. I was supposed to be asleep, but I heard them arguing in the kitchen." Michael's face had gone pale. "Emma, baby, you don't have to—" "Mr. Hayes, be quiet," Judge Thornton commanded, his eyes never leaving Emma. "What did you hear, child?" Emma's voice became stronger, clearer, as if she had been waiting months to tell this story. "Mr. Ashford told Daddy that he needed to sign some papers or bad things would happen to our family. He said Daddy was going to take the blame for the missing money. When Daddy said no, Mr. Ashford got really mean. He said nobody would believe Daddy because he was just an accountant, but everyone loved Mr. Ashford because he was famous." The courtroom had become so quiet that the humming of the fluorescent lights was audible. Rachel Foster stood frozen, apparently hearing this story for the first time. The prosecutor looked like he wanted to object, but seemed temporarily paralyzed. "Mr. Ashford said he had changed all the computer records to make it look like Daddy took the money," Emma continued, her small voice filling the enormous courtroom. "He said he needed the money for his gambling debts, but if anyone found out, the foundation would close and no more children would get help. So Daddy had to be the bad guy. This is completely inadmissible hearsay from a child." Prosecutor Hutchinson finally found his voice. "Your Honor, you can't possibly—" "I can and will hear whatever I want in my courtroom," Judge Thornton snapped. His analytical mind was already working through the implications. "Mr. Hutchinson, where is Mr. Ashford today?" "He's not scheduled to testify until tomorrow, Your Honor. He's an extremely busy man. Get him here. Now." The judge's tone left no room for argument. "And I want his financial records subpoenaed immediately. Everything. Bank accounts, credit cards, property holdings, all of it. Your Honor, you can't seriously be derailing this entire case based on a child's fairy tale." The prosecutor's professional composure was cracking. "Watch me," Judge Thornton responded coldly. Then he turned back to Emma, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Young lady, do you understand how serious these accusations are?" "Yes, sir," Emma nodded. "But I also understand that my daddy is good, and Mr. Ashford is bad, even if everyone thinks it's the other way around." Judge Thornton leaned back in his wheelchair, his fingers steepled as he processed this unprecedented situation. In his long career, he had prided himself on seeing through deception, on being immune to emotional manipulation. But there was something about this child's testimony that rang with truth. "Bailiff Morrison, I want Mr. Hayes returned to holding but kept comfortable. "Ms. Foster, you and Emma will remain in the courthouse under supervision. And Mr. Hutchinson, you have exactly 6 hours to produce Roland Ashford in my courtroom, or I'm dismissing this case with prejudice." The courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters rushed for the exits to file breaking news. Spectators argued about what they had just witnessed. The prosecutor looked like he had been struck by lightning, but Emma simply looked up at her father with eyes that held hope for the first time in months. "I told you I'd make them listen, Daddy." Michael Hayes pulled his daughter into a fierce embrace, his shoulders shaking with sobs. "I love you so much, baby girl. So much." As the gods gently separated them, Emma called out one more thing, her voice carrying over the chaos. "Judge Thornton, sir. When they prove Daddy is innocent, I'm going to help you too." The judge paused in wheeling himself toward his chambers. "Help me how, child?" Emma's response was delivered with such pure confidence that it sent chills through everyone who heard it. "I'm going to make you walk again. I promise." The laughter that erupted was immediate and cruel. Several spectators openly mocked the child's naive promise. Even some of the court staff smiled at what they assumed was childish fantasy. But Judge Malcolm Thornton didn't laugh. He stared at the small girl who had just turned his courtroom upside down, and for the first time in years, he felt something he had long ago abandoned, a tiny spark of curiosity about what was possible. "We'll see," he said quietly, before disappearing into his chambers. Nobody in that courtroom could have imagined that within days, Emma Hayes would prove every single one of her promises true, and in the process, expose a conspiracy that reached far beyond one man's stolen millions. The real story was just beginning. The next 6 hours transformed the courthouse into a war zone of legal maneuvering and frantic investigation. Judge Thornton's chambers had become command central, with financial investigators, forensic accountants, and FBI agents streaming in and out with stunning regularity. The judge had made it clear, if there was even a shred of truth to Emma Hayes' accusations, he wanted every stone turned, every document examined, every lead followed. Rachel Foster sat in a private witness room with Emma, both exhausted but unable to rest. The little girl had finally stopped crying, but her small body still trembled periodically with the aftershocks of emotional release. She had been carrying this secret for months, terrified that speaking up would put her father in even more danger. "Emma, honey," Rachel said softly, stroking her niece's hair, "why didn't you tell me about what you heard that night?" Emma looked up with eyes that held far too much wisdom for someone her age. "Because Mr. Ashford said he had friends everywhere. He said if Daddy told anyone, they would hurt you, and hurt me, and Daddy would never get out of prison. I was scared, Aunt Rachel. But when I saw Daddy in that courtroom looking so sad, I couldn't be quiet anymore." Rachel pulled Emma close, her own tears flowing freely. "You're the bravest person I know. Your Daddy would be so proud. Nathan would be so proud." At the mention of her deceased brother, Emma's expression shifted to something distant and ethereal. "Nathan told me to be brave. He visits me sometimes in my dreams. He said Daddy needed me to speak up even if I was scared." Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. After Nathan's death 2 years ago, Emma had changed in ways that the family couldn't quite explain. She had always been intuitive, but now she sometimes said things that seemed impossible for a child to know. She would mention details about people's health problems before they were diagnosed, or know when someone was lying with uncanny accuracy. A sharp knock interrupted Rachel's thoughts. Bailiff Morrison entered, his expression grave. "Miss Foster, Judge Thornton wants to see you and Emma. And ma'am, Roland Ashford has just arrived." The walk through the courthouse corridors felt like a death march. Emma held Rachel's hand tightly, her small fingers gripping with surprising strength. When they entered the main courtroom, the scene was dramatically different from the morning session. Roland Ashford sat at the prosecution table flanked by 3 expensive lawyers. He was a handsome man in his late 40s, with the kind of charismatic presence that made people instinctively trust him. His reputation as a humanitarian had made him untouchable, until now. His expression was one of controlled outrage, but Emma noticed something others missed. His hands were shaking slightly, and a thin sheen of sweat covered his forehead, despite the air conditioning. "Your Honor," Ashford's lead attorney, a woman named Victoria Cross, began immediately. "This is an absolute travesty of justice. My client has been dragged here based on the imaginative accusations of a child who is clearly traumatized and—" "Ms. Cross, I suggest you let your client speak for himself," Judge Thornton interrupted coldly. "Mr. Ashford, you've been brought here under subpoena. Do you understand that you are under oath?" "Of course, Your Honor," Ashford replied with practiced smoothness, though his voice held an edge of tension. "I understand completely, and I want to state categorically that these accusations are not only false, but deeply hurtful. I have dedicated my life to helping children with cancer. The suggestion that I would steal from them is unconscionable." "Then you won't mind explaining some interesting findings," Judge Thornton said, gesturing to a forensic accountant who had been working feverishly since the morning session. "Mr. Patterson, please share what you've discovered." Thomas Patterson, a middle-aged man with decades of experience tracking financial fraud, stood with a thick folder. "Your Honor, in the past 5 hours, we've uncovered some extremely troubling patterns. Mr. Ashford has gambling debts totaling over $3 million with various offshore casinos. He also has several property holdings that were purchased in the same time frame as the alleged embezzlement, all through shell corporations." The color drained from Ashford's face. Victoria Cross immediately stood. "Your Honor, my client's personal finances are not on trial here. Michael Hayes is the one accused. Your client made himself relevant when he became the star witness against Mr. Hayes," Judge Thornton shot back. "Mr. Patterson, continue. Furthermore, we found evidence of sophisticated accounting manipulation in the Foundation's digital records. The interesting thing is that all the alterations were made from Mr. Ashford's personal computer, not Mr. Hayes' workstation. The metadata doesn't lie." The courtroom, which had been filling steadily as news of the emergency session spread, erupted in shocked murmurs. Prosecutor Hutchinson looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. His entire case was crumbling in real time. Emma, who had been standing quietly beside her aunt, suddenly stepped forward. "Mr. Ashford, do you remember what you said to my daddy that night?" All eyes turned to the small girl who had set this avalanche in motion. Ashford's lawyer moved to object, but Ashford himself held up a hand, his expression shifting to something almost pitying. "Sweetheart," he said with practiced gentleness, "I understand you love your father very much, but sometimes our memories play tricks on us, especially when we're very young and under stress. You said you needed the money because you owed bad people who would hurt your family if you didn't pay." Emma interrupted, her voice clear and unwavering. "You said my daddy was perfect to blame because he had access to everything and nobody would question it. You said everybody loved you too much to believe you could do anything wrong." The specificity of Emma's recollection sent another wave of whispers through the crowd. Ashford's mask of compassionate concern was beginning to crack. "Your Honor, this child has clearly been coached," Victoria Cross objected desperately. "Someone has fed her these—" "Nobody coached her," Rachel Foster spoke up, her voice shaking but determined. "Emma has barely spoken about any of this until today. She was too frightened, and I believe every word she's saying." Judge Thornton leaned forward in his wheelchair, his eyes boring into Roland Ashford. "Mr. Ashford, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I remind you that you are under oath. Did you visit Michael Hayes' home weeks before his arrest?" Ashford's lawyers immediately huddled with him, whispering urgently. The seconds stretched into an uncomfortable minute. Finally, Ashford spoke, his voice strained. I did visit Mr. Hayes at his home, but it was a professional visit, nothing nefarious." "Why didn't you mention this visit in any of your previous testimony?" Judge Thornton demanded. "It didn't seem relevant. A private late-night visit to the home of a man you would later accuse of massive fraud didn't seem relevant." The judge's voice dripped with skepticism. "Mr. Ashford, I strongly suggest you reconsider your testimony, because right now, you're looking at potential perjury charges at minimum." Emma watched all of this unfold with an intensity that made several court observers uncomfortable. There was something about the way she looked at Ashford, not with childish anger, but with a penetrating awareness that seemed to see straight through his carefully constructed facade. He's lying, Emma said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension. He's lying right now. His heart is beating really fast and he's scared. How could you possibly know that? Victoria Cross challenged, trying to regain control. I just know, Emma replied simply. Then she turned to Judge Thornton with that same unsettling clarity. Judge, sir, can I talk to Mr. Ashford? Just for a minute, please. Judge Thornton studied the child for a long moment. Every legal instinct told him this was irregular, unprecedented, potentially problematic. But his intuition, the same intuition that had made him a legendary judge before his accident, told him to allow it. 1 minute, he said, but I want it on the record. Emma walked slowly toward Roland Ashford, her small frame seeming to carry a weight far beyond her physical size. The courtroom was so silent that people could hear the soft sound of her footsteps on the tile floor. When she reached Ashford, she looked up at him with eyes that held no hatred, no anger, only a profound sadness. Mr. Ashford, why did you do it? All those children needed that money, children like my brother Nathan. For the first time, Ashford's carefully maintained composure completely shattered. His face crumpled, and tears began streaming down his cheeks. His lawyers looked horrified, but he waved them away. I don't know, he whispered, his voice breaking. I don't know. It started small, just a little to cover a bad bet. Then it got bigger and I couldn't stop and I was in so deep. He buried his face in his hands. God forgive me. Those children. Your brother. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters scrambled to capture every word. Prosecutor Hutchinson sat frozen in shock. Victoria Cross was frantically trying to control her client, who seemed to be having a complete breakdown. But Emma just stood there, her small hand reaching out to touch Ashford's arm. It's okay to tell the truth now. Nathan would want you to tell the truth. All those other children need you to tell the truth. Something about the way she said her brother's name, with such gentle authority, broke something fundamental in Roland Ashford. He looked at this little girl who should have hated him, who should have wanted him destroyed, and saw only compassion. I did it, he said clearly, his voice carrying across the courtroom. All of it. Michael Hayes is innocent. I stole the money. I manipulated the records. I threatened him and his family. I did everything they're accusing him of, and more. The confession was met with stunned silence, followed by an eruption of noise that Judge Thornton had to gavel down repeatedly. Victoria Cross looked like she wanted to stop her client, but it was too late. The truth was out. Your Honor, Prosecutor Hutchinson stood shakily, his face ashen. In light of this testimony, the state moves to immediately dismiss all charges against Michael Hayes and requests that Mr. Ashford be taken into custody pending formal charges. Motion granted, Judge Thornton said, his voice heavy with satisfaction and something else. A grudging respect for the little girl who had dismantled a carefully constructed lie with nothing but truth and courage. Bailiff Morrison, take Mr. Ashford into custody, and someone bring Michael Hayes up here immediately. As guards led a weeping Roland Ashford away, Emma turned back to Judge Thornton. The judge was watching her with an expression of wonder mixed with deep curiosity. Young lady, he said slowly, how did you know he would confess? Emma tilted her head, considering the question. Because sometimes people want to tell the truth, but they're too scared. They just need someone to show them it's okay. Nathan taught me that. Your brother who passed away? Yes, sir. He was very wise for being only 5. He told me that people's hearts hurt when they lie, and if you can help them stop hurting, they'll choose truth. Rachel Foster had approached her niece, placing protective hands on Emma's shoulders. Your Honor, my niece has been through so much. May we please— Of course, Judge Thornton nodded. But Ms. Foster, I'd like to speak with you and Emma tomorrow, if possible. There's something about your niece that I find extraordinary. Before Rachel could respond, the courtroom doors burst open and Michael Hayes was escorted in by guards who now treated him with careful respect rather than contempt. When he saw Emma, he broke into a run, sweeping her up in his arms and sobbing with relief and joy. My baby girl, he kept repeating. My brave, beautiful baby girl. Emma wrapped her arms around her father's neck and whispered something in his ear that only he could hear. Whatever she said made Michael's eyes widen, and he looked at her with a mixture of awe and slight fear. Judge Thornton watched this reunion with an expression that few in the courtroom had ever seen on his stern face. genuine emotion. For years since his accident, he had armored himself with cynicism and harsh judgment. But this child had cracked that armor simply by being authentic, by speaking truth with innocent courage. "Mr. Hayes," the judge said formally, drawing Michael's attention, "all charges against you are dismissed with prejudice. You're free to go. And Mr. Hayes, I apologize. The system failed you, and I nearly failed you. Your daughter saved you. Never forget that." Michael nodded, too overcome to speak, holding Emma tighter. As the courtroom finally began to clear, Emma wriggled out of her father's arms and walked back toward Judge Thornton's bench. The judge watched her approach with curiosity. "Judge Thornton, sir," Emma said softly, "can I visit you tomorrow? I meant what I said, about helping you walk again." The judge's expression hardened slightly. "Young lady, I appreciate what you've done today. You've performed a miracle in this courtroom. But some miracles aren't possible. I've been in this wheelchair for years. Multiple specialists have told me." "I know what they told you," Emma interrupted gently. "But they're wrong. Well, not completely wrong. Your legs could work again, but you're too scared to try because it might hurt, and you're tired of hurting." Judge Thornton felt as if ice water had been poured down his spine. How could this child know that? The psychological barrier that kept him wheelchair-bound, despite partial medical clearance for therapy, was something he had never discussed with anyone except his private physician. "How do you—" he began, then stopped, unsure how to finish the question. "I just know things sometimes," Emma said with a small shrug. "Nathan says I'm supposed to help people. So can I try to help you? Please?" Judge Malcolm Thornton looked into the eyes of this 8-year-old child who had already proven capable of impossible things and made a decision that surprised even himself. "Yes," he said quietly. "You can try." Emma's face lit up with a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire courtroom. "Tomorrow then. I promise you'll walk again, Judge Thornton. I promise." As Emma rejoined her father and aunt, Judge Thornton sat alone in his wheelchair, wondering what he had just agreed to and whether this extraordinary child was about to prove that miracles, real miracles, were still possible in a world he had long ago decided was too broken to believe in them. Tomorrow would either validate his cynicism or shatter it completely. He found himself hoping for the first time in years that it would be the latter. The morning after the trial brought an unexpected media storm. News of Roland Ashford's confession had spread like wildfire, with journalists camping outside the courthouse, Michael Hayes's modest apartment, and even Judge Thornton's private residence. The story had everything the public craved: a fallen hero, a wrongly accused victim, and a mysterious child who had somehow unraveled a complex conspiracy with nothing but truth and inexplicable intuition. Judge Malcolm Thornton sat in his study, staring at the morning newspapers spread across his desk. His face appeared on every front page, alongside Emma's photograph and headlines that ranged from sympathetic to sensational. "Wheelchair-bound judge promises miracle meeting with psychic child," read one particularly tabloid-style banner. He grimaced at the word psychic, but couldn't entirely dismiss it, given what he had witnessed. His private nurse, a competent woman named Patricia Chen, who had been with him for 3 years, entered with his morning medication and coffee. "Your visitors will be here in an hour, Judge. Should I prepare the therapy room, or would you prefer the living area?" "The therapy room," Thornton decided after a moment's consideration. The space had been converted from a guest bedroom years ago, filled with equipment his doctors had insisted would help with his rehabilitation. Equipment that had gone largely unused because the pain, both physical and psychological, had proven too overwhelming. "And Patricia, I want you to stay during the meeting. Document everything that happens." Patricia nodded, though her expression showed concern. "Judge, I feel obligated to remind you that this child, however remarkable she may be, isn't a licensed medical professional. Whatever she thinks she can do—" "I know what she isn't," Thornton interrupted, his voice softer than usual. "But I also know what I saw in that courtroom. That little girl looked at me and knew things about my condition that I've never discussed with anyone except Dr. Reynolds. I need to understand how." What Judge Thornton didn't share with Patricia was the dream he'd had the previous night. A vivid, impossibly clear dream where a small boy with Emma's eyes had appeared, introducing himself as Nathan. The boy had told him that his sister was coming to help, and that the judge needed to trust her completely. She sees what others can't, the dream Nathan had said. She sees the part of you that's still whole. Thornton had dismissed it as stress-induced imagination upon waking, but the dream had felt more real than any he'd experienced in years, and there was one detail that had shaken him: the dream. Nathan had accurately described the surgical scar on Thornton's lower back, a scar that was always covered and that he had never publicly discussed. The doorbell's chime pulled him from his troubled thoughts. Through the window, he could see Michael Hayes' car parked outside, with Emma and Rachel Foster emerging. The little girl wore a simple outfit and carried a small backpack, looking for all the world like she was heading to school rather than attempting to perform a miracle. Patricia escorted them into the therapy room, where Judge Thornton waited in his wheelchair. The space was large and well lit, with parallel bars, a therapy table, resistance bands, and various other rehabilitation equipment that mocked him with their potential. Michael Hayes looked overwhelmed by the grandeur of the judge's home, but Emma's attention was focused entirely on Thornton himself. "Thank you for seeing us, Your Honor," Michael began formally, clearly uncomfortable in these surroundings. His freedom was so new that he kept glancing around as if expecting guards to appear. "I know this is highly unusual." "Mr. Hayes, you owe me no explanations," Thornton interrupted, his eyes never leaving Emma. "Your daughter made me a promise, and I find myself curious to see if she can keep it. Although I should warn you all that I've had the best orthopedic specialists in the country examine me. The consensus is that while there's some nerve function remaining, the psychological trauma and chronic pain have created barriers that are insurmountable." Emma stepped forward, tilting her head as she studied the judge with that unsettling intensity he remembered from the courtroom. "You had the accident 4 years ago. A drunk driver hit your car, and you were thrown from the vehicle. You broke your back in 3 places and shattered both legs. The doctors said you might never walk again, but after 2 years of surgery and therapy, they changed their minds. They said you could walk with assistance, but you stopped trying." The specificity of her knowledge sent chills through everyone in the room. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Michael looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. Rachel Foster seemed to be praying silently. "How do you know all that?" Thornton demanded, his voice rough with emotion. "Nathan told me," Emma replied simply. "He said you stopped trying because of Margaret." The name hit Judge Thornton like a physical blow. His face drained of color, and his hands gripped the wheelchair's armrests with white-knuckled intensity. "Don't you dare," he whispered harshly. "Don't you dare speak about your wife," Emma continued gently, her voice filled with compassion rather than cruelty. "She died in the same accident. She died instantly, and you survived. And every time you tried to walk again, every time therapy hurt, you felt guilty because she couldn't walk anymore, couldn't hurt anymore, couldn't be anymore. So you decided if she couldn't walk, you wouldn't either." The silence that followed was devastating. Patricia Chen had worked with Judge Thornton for 3 years and had never heard him mention a wife. Michael and Rachel stood frozen, realizing they were witnessing something intensely private and painful. Judge Malcolm Thornton's face crumpled, and for the first time since the accident that had destroyed his life, he wept openly, great, heaving sobs that shook his entire body, releasing years of grief and guilt that he had locked away behind judicial severity and deliberate isolation. "She was everything," he choked out between sobs. "Margaret was everything good in my life, and I killed her. I was driving. I should have seen the other car sooner. I should have—" "The drunk driver killed her," Emma interrupted firmly, moving closer and placing her small hand on the judge's trembling shoulder. "Not you. You were a victim too. And Judge Thornton, Margaret doesn't want you to stop living because she had to. Nathan told me to tell you that. He said Margaret visits you in dreams sometimes, and she's been trying to tell you the same thing, but you won't listen." Thornton looked up sharply, his tear-stained face showing shock. "I do dream about her. Sometimes she's telling me to let go, to move forward, but I always wake up before." "How do you know this? What are you?" Emma's expression was serene, otherworldly. "I'm just Emma, but after Nathan died, I started being able to feel things other people feel, see things they hide. My mommy says it's because Nathan's spirit stays close to me, helping me understand people's hearts. I don't know if that's true, but I know that when I touch people who are hurting, I can sometimes help them stop hurting. Young lady? Patricia finally spoke up, her medical training demanding she intervene. The judge has severe nerve damage and chronic pain syndrome. Whatever you think you can do, it's not something that can be fixed with touch, Emma finished. I know. Nathan says the body remembers how to heal itself, but sometimes the mind won't let it. Judge Thornton's legs could work, but his mind built walls around the pain because the emotional hurt was too big. If we can help him let go of the guilt, his body will remember how to work again. The explanation was both simplistic and profound. Patricia wanted to dismiss it as childish, magical thinking, but something in Emma's certainty gave her pause. This is insane, Thornton muttered, wiping his eyes roughly. I'm a rational man. I believe in evidence, in science, in miracles, Emma asked softly. You saw one happen yesterday in your courtroom. You saw a man's innocence proven, because I knew things I shouldn't have known. You felt it was true before the evidence came. Why is it so hard to believe you could walk again? Because I don't deserve to walk again. The words exploded from Thornton with raw anguish. Margaret is dead because of my choices. She was only 43 years old. We were supposed to grow old together, travel the world when I retired, have grandchildren. His voice broke completely. How dare I walk when she can't? How dare I live a full life when hers was cut short? Emma knelt beside the wheelchair, her small hand taking one of the judge's larger ones. Judge Thornton, can I tell you what Nathan told me about guilt? Thornton nodded, unable to speak. He said that guilt is like a heavy blanket. When you're cold, a blanket helps. But if you never take it off, even when the sun comes out, you'll get too hot and sick. Guilt helped you survive at first. It gave you something to focus on, instead of the pain of missing Margaret. But now it's making you sick. It's time to take off the blanket and feel the sun again. The metaphor, delivered in a child's simple language, somehow penetrated Thornton's intellectual defenses more effectively than years of therapy might have. He found himself actually considering the possibility that his suffering wasn't honoring Margaret's memory. It was just suffering. What do you want me to do? He asked quietly. I want you to stand up, Emma said simply. Just try. I'll help. Young lady, that's not possible, Patricia protested. The judge hasn't supported his own weight in years. His muscles have atrophied, his balance is... His muscles remember, Emma insisted. His body remembers. It's just waiting for his mind to give permission. Michael Hayes, who had been silent throughout this emotional exchange, finally spoke. Your Honor, my daughter has never been wrong about these things. When my son Nathan was dying, Emma told us 2 days before the doctors did. When my sister Rachel was diagnosed with diabetes, Emma knew months before symptoms appeared. I don't understand how she knows what she knows, but she's never been wrong. Rachel nodded emphatically. It's true, Your Honor. Emma is special. She always has been. But after Nathan passed, it's like something opened up in her. She can sense things about people, about their health, their hearts. We don't understand it, but we've learned to trust it. Judge Thornton looked from face to face, seeing only sincerity and hope. Then he looked down at Emma, who smiled at him with such pure confidence that he felt something shift inside his chest. The weight he had carried for 4 years, the guilt, the grief, the self-imposed punishment, suddenly felt like it might be possible to set down. If I try this and fail, he said slowly, if nothing happens, will you promise not to feel bad? Will you understand that some things are beyond even your remarkable gifts? I promise, Emma said solemnly. But Judge Thornton, you won't fail. Margaret told Nathan that you're ready. She said she's waited a long time for you to be ready. With shaking hands, Judge Malcolm Thornton gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. Patricia rushed forward instinctively, but Emma held up a hand to stop her. He has to do this part himself first, Emma said. He has to choose to try. Thornton took several deep breaths, feeling muscles that hadn't engaged in years beginning to wake up. The familiar fear rose in his throat. Fear of pain, fear of failure, fear of disappointing the ghost of his beloved Margaret. But louder than the fear was Emma's voice, soft and certain. You can do this. She wants you to do this. With a groan that was equal parts effort and emotional release, Judge Malcolm Thornton pushed himself upward from the wheelchair. His legs trembled violently, threatening to collapse immediately. Pain shot through his back and thighs, the familiar agony that had made him quit therapy so many times before. But then Emma's small hand pressed against his back, right over the surgical scar she should have had no way of knowing about, and something extraordinary happened. The pain didn't disappear completely. That would have been too fantastical even for this impossible moment. But it shifted. It transformed from a screaming alarm into something more like a whisper, like his body saying, "This is hard, but we remember how to do this." "That's it," Emma encouraged, her other hand supporting his elbow. "Your body remembers, Judge Thornton. Let it remember." Patricia watched in medical disbelief as Judge Thornton, who had been wheelchair-bound for years despite partial medical clearance, slowly straightened his legs and took weight onto them. His face was contorted with effort and emotion, sweat pouring down his forehead, but he was standing. "Oh my God," Michael breathed. "It's actually happening." "One step," Emma said softly. "Just one step toward Margaret. She's waiting for you to come back to life. One step to show her you're ready." Judge Malcolm Thornton, with tears streaming down his face and his entire body shaking with effort, lifted his right foot and moved it forward 6 inches. Then his left. Then his right again. 3 steps. The first 3 steps he had taken on his own in 4 years. Then his strength gave out, and he collapsed. But Patricia and Michael were ready, catching him before he could fall and lowering him back into the wheelchair. He was gasping, crying, laughing all at once. A man who had just glimpsed a future he had convinced himself was impossible. "I stood," he kept repeating, his voice filled with wonder. "I walked. I actually walked." Emma knelt beside him again, smiling with the satisfaction of a promise kept. "You did. And tomorrow, you'll walk more. And the day after that, even more. Your body remembers, Judge Thornton. It was just waiting for your heart to heal enough to let it try." Patricia was checking the judge's vital signs with shaking hands, her medical training warring with what she had just witnessed. I don't understand how. Your muscle tone shouldn't have been able to support that. The neural pathways. Some things can't be explained with science alone," Rachel said softly. "Sometimes you just have to accept that grace exists." Judge Thornton looked at Emma with an expression of awe mixed with profound gratitude. "You gave me back hope. That's what you really did. You showed me that maybe, just maybe, life isn't over. That maybe Margaret would want me to really live, not just exist." "She does want that," Emma said with absolute certainty. "And Nathan says to tell you that healing takes time, but you've taken the hardest step already. The first one." As the Hayes family prepared to leave, Judge Thornton called out to Emma one more time. "Young lady, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. For me, for your father, for showing me that impossible things can still happen." Emma's response would echo in Thornton's mind for years to come. "You don't need to thank me, Judge. Just promise you'll keep walking, keep healing, and when you can, help other people remember that they can heal too. That's how you thank Nathan and Margaret, by living so well that other people remember how to hope again." After they left, Judge Malcolm Thornton sat alone in his therapy room, staring at the parallel bars he hadn't touched in years. His legs ached with the deep pain of muscles reawakening after a long sleep. His heart ached with the beginning of healing from grief he had thought would define him forever. And for the first time since the accident that had destroyed his life and stolen his wife, Judge Malcolm Thornton allowed himself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, miracles were still possible. Tomorrow, he decided, he would try again, and the day after that, and the day after that. Because a child who could see into hearts had shown him that the only prison that truly held him was the one he had built himself. It was time to walk free. 3 weeks after Emma Hayes walked into Judge Malcolm Thornton's life and changed it forever, the courtroom that had witnessed so many transformations was packed once again. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. This was not a trial, but a special hearing, one that had drawn national media attention and representatives from child welfare organizations across the country. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Judge Malcolm Thornton actually walked, using a cane for support, but moving under his own power with deliberate, careful steps. His physical therapist, Patricia Chen, walked beside him not to support him physically, but as a proud witness to what many had called medically improbable. The transformation was remarkable not just physically but spiritually. The stern, hardened man who had ruled his courtroom with cynical authority had been replaced by someone whose eyes held warmth and whose face showed the peace of someone who had finally forgiven himself. "Please be seated," Thornton said as he carefully lowered himself into his chair behind the bench. He no longer used the wheelchair. It sat in a corner of his chambers, as a reminder of what he had overcome. "This court is now in session. We are here today for a very special purpose, to address the aftermath of the Children's Hope Foundation fraud case, and to recognize those whose lives were devastated by Roland Ashford's crimes." Michael Hayes sat in the front row beside Emma and Rachel, still adjusting to his freedom and his daughter's newfound fame. Emma had become something of a media phenomenon, with news outlets calling her everything from the miracle child to the truth speaker. But the attention made her uncomfortable. She had never wanted fame. She simply wanted to help people the way Nathan had taught her. Prosecutor Gerald Hutchinson, who had been humbled by his role in almost convicting an innocent man, stood to address the court. His entire approach to justice had been shaken by the Hayes case, and he had spent the past weeks working tirelessly to right the wrongs that Ashford's scheme had created. "Your Honor," Hutchinson began, his voice carrying genuine emotion rather than his previous prosecutorial detachment. "Our investigation into Roland Ashford's activities has uncovered a fraud far more extensive than initially believed. The $2 million stolen from the Children's Hope Foundation was only part of the story." The courtroom stirred with murmurs. Judge Thornton gestured for Hutchinson to continue. "We've discovered that over a period of 5 years, Mr. Ashford embezzled approximately $8 million total. But more devastating than the financial theft is what we've learned about the families who were denied treatment funding during that time. Families who were told there wasn't enough money to help their children, when in reality, their donations were being diverted to offshore casinos and luxury purchases." Thornton's expression darkened. "How many families are we talking about, Mr. Hutchinson?" 47 families that we've identified so far, Your Honor. 47 children who died or suffered unnecessarily because treatment funds were stolen." Hutchinson paused, visibly struggling with his emotions. "And that's just in the past 5 years. If Ashford was doing this longer, the number could be significantly higher." The courtroom erupted in shocked exclamations and angry murmurs. Judge Thornton had to use his gavel to restore order. His hand trembled slightly with rage as he processed this information. "Where is Ashford now?" "In federal custody, Your Honor. He's awaiting trial on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and several other charges that will likely put him away for the rest of his life. But that doesn't help the families who lost children, or those who are still fighting illnesses without adequate resources." It was then that Emma stood up from her seat, drawing everyone's attention. Something about the way she moved, with purpose and determination beyond her years, made the entire courtroom fall silent. "Judge Thornton, sir." Emma's clear voice carried throughout the room. "Can I say something?" Thornton nodded, gesturing for her to approach. Emma walked to the center of the courtroom, and as she did, several people in the gallery stood. They were parents, ranging in age from young to middle-aged, all holding photographs. The pictures showed children, some smiling in healthier times, others clearly ill. A few were memorial photos. "Your Honor, these are families like mine," Emma said, gesturing to the standing parents. "Families who lost children because Mr. Ashford stole their hope. But there are also families here who still have children fighting. Children who need help now." A woman in her 30s stepped forward, tears already streaming down her face. "Your Honor, my name is Jennifer Walsh. This is my daughter Claire." She held up a photograph of a little girl with a bright smile, though the scarf covering her head indicated chemotherapy treatment. "Claire is 9 years old. She has leukemia. We applied to the Children's Hope Foundation for assistance 6 months ago because our insurance won't cover the experimental treatment she needs. We were denied. They said the fund was depleted. Now we know why." Another parent stepped forward, an older man with grief etched deeply into his features. "I'm Robert Simmons. My son Daniel died 2 years ago because we couldn't afford the treatment he needed. We had applied for foundation assistance and were told no funds were available. My boy was 7 years old. 7. He died believing we didn't do enough to save him." The man's voice broke completely, and the sound of his grief was unbearable. Several spectators were openly weeping. Even Prosecutor Hutchinson had to turn away to compose himself. One by one, more parents came forward with their stories. Each one was a knife to the heart. Tales of children who suffered, families bankrupted by medical bills, hope stolen by one man's greed and addiction. By the time the 10th parent had spoken, Judge Thornton's face was wet with tears he made no effort to hide. "Enough," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "I've heard enough. Mr. Hutchinson, what is being done to help these families?" "The foundation has been dissolved, Your Honor. Its remaining assets are being liquidated to establish a victim compensation fund, but the amount recovered is nowhere near adequate to address the scope of harm. We're talking about maybe $200,000 available when the medical needs run into the millions." Emma had been listening intently to all of this, her small face showing the weight of others' pain. Then she turned to her father with an expression that Michael had learned meant she was about to do something unexpected. "Daddy, can you give me the envelope?" Michael looked confused but reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope he had been carrying. Emma took it and walked directly to Judge Thornton's bench, holding it up. "Judge Thornton, this morning my daddy received something in the mail. It's from lawyers representing Nathan's medical fund." Thornton took the envelope with curiosity, opening it to reveal legal documents. As he read, his eyes widened in shock. "This says that the Hayes family is donating $350,000 to help families affected by the foundation fraud. Mr. Hayes, is this accurate?" Michael stood, his voice shaking. "Your Honor, after Nathan died, there was a fundraiser in our community. People donated to help us with medical bills, but Nathan passed before we could use most of it. The money has been sitting in a trust fund. Emma convinced me that Nathan would want his fund to help other children fighting the same battle he lost." The courtroom was completely silent as the weight of this sacrifice registered. The Hayes family, who had lost everything, their son, their savings, Michael's freedom temporarily, were now giving away the one financial cushion they had. "But that's not enough," Emma said simply, her child's voice cutting through the emotional atmosphere. "There are too many families who need help, so I have an idea." Judge Thornton leaned forward, and despite the tears on his face, he managed a gentle smile. "Of course you do. What's your idea, Emma? You should make a new foundation, a real one that actually helps children. And you should be in charge, because now you understand what it's like to need a miracle and get one." The suggestion was so direct, so innocent in its delivery, yet so profound in its implications, that Thornton found himself momentarily speechless. "Emma, sweetheart," Rachel spoke up gently, "Judge Thornton has very important work to do. He can't just—" "Actually," Thornton interrupted, his mind already racing with possibilities. "She might be onto something. Miss Foster, Mr. Hayes, would you allow me to speak with Emma privately for a moment? In my chambers?" 5 minutes later, Emma sat across from Judge Thornton in his office, a space that had once been decorated with law books and stern judicial portraits, but now included photographs of Margaret and motivational quotes about healing and hope. "Emma," Thornton said seriously, "what you're suggesting is a massive undertaking. Creating a legitimate charitable foundation, ensuring proper oversight, raising funds, distributing them fairly. It would be a full-time job on top of my judicial duties. But you could do it," Emma replied with absolute certainty. "And it would make Margaret happy. Nathan says she's been watching you walk again, and she's so proud. But she also wants you to help other people walk through their hard times." Thornton felt the familiar chill that Emma's impossible knowledge always brought. "You really do speak with your brother, don't you? Or something speaks through you? I've stopped trying to understand it." "Nathan is always with me," Emma said simply. "Just like Margaret is always with you. They're trying to help from where they are, but they need us to do the work here." "That's why Nathan showed me how to help you walk, because you're supposed to help other people find their way when they're lost." The judge stood, an action that still filled him with wonder every time he did it, and walked to his window overlooking the city, his city, full of people struggling, suffering, needing hope. "If I did this," he said slowly, "if I established a foundation dedicated to helping families with pediatric medical expenses, I would need help. I would need people I could trust absolutely, people who understand what these families are going through. My daddy could help," Emma offered immediately. "He knows everything about foundation finances, and he knows what not to do because of what Mr. Ashford did. Your father, Thornton mused, the man I almost helped wrongly convict. Yes, there's a certain poetic justice in that. He turned back to Emma with decision crystallizing in his eyes. All right, I'll do it, but on one condition. What condition? You have to help me. Not running the foundation, you're too young for that, but helping me understand which families really need help the most. You seem to be able to see into people's hearts, Emma. I need that gift to make sure we help the right people for the right reasons. Emma considered this seriously, her young face showing the weight of responsibility. Nathan says that's why he sent me to you, because together we can help lots of people. But Judge Thornton, I have to tell you something important. What's that? My abilities, the things I know and feel, they're getting stronger but also harder. Sometimes I feel too much. Sometimes I know things about people that hurt to know. My daddy and Aunt Rachel are worried about me because I cry a lot at night from feeling other people's pain. Thornton's heart clenched with concern. This extraordinary child was bearing a burden that no 8-year-old should carry. Then we'll have to be very careful. We'll make sure you only help when you want to, when you feel strong enough. And Emma, I'll make sure you have support. Maybe we can find a counselor who specializes in gifted children, someone who can help you process what you feel. Would you teach me too? Emma asked suddenly. About justice and fairness and how to help people the right way? You want me to teach you about justice? Thornton almost laughed. Emma, you taught me more about real justice in one courtroom appearance than I learned in 30 years on the bench. But I don't understand all the legal stuff. I just feel what's right. Nathan says feelings are important, but knowledge is important too. You have the knowledge part. Maybe if we work together we can be like super helpers. The term super helpers was so childishly earnest that Thornton couldn't help but smile. But beneath the innocent phrasing was a profound truth. Together, they might actually be able to make a significant difference. All right, he agreed. I'll teach you about law and justice, and you teach me about compassion and seeing with the heart. Is it a deal? Emma stood and extended her small hand formally. It's a deal, Judge Thornton. Nathan says Margaret is really happy right now. He says she's proud of you for choosing to help instead of just judging. They shook hands solemnly, and in that moment, Judge Malcolm Thornton felt something he hadn't experienced since before his accident. A sense of purpose that extended beyond himself, beyond his pain, beyond his courtroom. He was being given a chance to transform suffering into hope, not just for himself, but for hundreds of families who desperately needed someone to believe in miracles. When they returned to the courtroom, Thornton made an announcement that would be reported in newspapers across the country. He was establishing the Margaret Thornton Foundation for Pediatric Medical Assistance, named in honor of his late wife. Michael Hayes would serve as the financial director, with full transparency and oversight to prevent any repeat of the Ashford situation. And Emma Hayes would serve as a special advisor for family outreach. The courtroom erupted in applause. Parents who had been drowning in despair suddenly had hope. Jennifer Walsh, the mother of 9-year-old Claire with leukemia, approached Emma with tears of gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, pulling Emma into a tight embrace. Thank you for not giving up on children like my Claire. But Emma's response was what truly captured the essence of who she was. I didn't do it alone. Nathan helped. And now we're all going to help together. That's how miracles really work. Lots of people deciding to help at the same time. As the hearing concluded, and people began to file out, still buzzing with excitement and hope, Emma remained behind for a moment, standing in the empty courtroom. Judge Thornton, who was gathering his papers, noticed her standing very still, her eyes closed, her face peaceful. Emma, are you all right? She opened her eyes and smiled. Nathan wanted me to tell you something. He says there are 47 children who needed help and didn't get it. But he can see the future a little bit, and he says because of what we're starting today, 470 children will get help they need. He says that's how you turn sadness into something good. You help more people than were hurt. Judge Thornton felt tears welling up again, but they were different tears now. Not tears of grief or guilt, but tears of purpose and hope. Tell Nathan thank you. And Emma, thank your brother for sending you to me. He saved more than just your father. He saved me too. He knows, Emma said simply. He's always known. As they left the courtroom together, the judge who had learned to walk again and the child who had shown him how, neither could have known that their partnership would become legendary, that the foundation they were creating would eventually help thousands of families, or that Emma's gifts would continue to manifest in ways that would challenge everything people thought they knew about healing, hope, and the persistence of love beyond death. But they both knew, with absolute certainty, that they were exactly where they were meant to be, doing exactly what they were meant to do. And sometimes, that knowledge is the greatest miracle of all. 5 years later, the Margaret Thornton Foundation had become one of the most respected pediatric medical assistance organizations in the country. The numbers told an extraordinary story. Over 2,000 families helped, $15 million raised and distributed, and a zero-tolerance policy for financial misconduct that had become the industry standard. But the real story wasn't in the numbers, it was in the lives transformed. On a crisp autumn morning, Judge Malcolm Thornton stood without assistance at the entrance of the Foundation's new headquarters, a building purchased and renovated specifically to serve families in crisis. He was 67 now, completely recovered, and had recently announced his retirement from the bench to dedicate himself fully to the Foundation's work. Beside him stood Emma Hayes, now 13 years old, preparing to cut the ribbon on the building's new wing, the Nathan Hayes Memorial Children's Center, a space where families could stay while their children received treatment at nearby hospitals. "Are you ready?" Thornton asked, looking at the young woman Emma was becoming. She was taller now, but still possessed that otherworldly quality that had changed his life years ago. "Nathan says this is exactly what it was all supposed to become," Emma replied softly. Her abilities hadn't diminished with age. If anything, they had refined, becoming more controlled and purposeful. Michael Hayes stood proudly beside Rachel, both watching Emma with tears already forming. Michael had rebuilt his reputation completely, becoming nationally recognized for his transparent and ethical foundation management. He had never forgotten the miracle his daughter had performed, not just proving his innocence, but transforming tragedy into hope. As Emma prepared to speak to the assembled crowd of donors, families, and media, a young woman pushed through the gathering. She was about 18. Healthy and vibrant, wearing a nursing school uniform. Jennifer Walsh and her daughter Claire, now 14, embraced Emma tightly. "We wanted to be here," Jennifer said emotionally. "Claire wouldn't be alive today if it weren't for this foundation. She's been cancer-free for 4 years and just started her first semester studying pediatric oncology. She wants to help other children the way she was helped." Emma hugged Claire back, and for a moment, those nearby swore they saw a shimmer of light around the two girls, something inexplicable, but beautiful. When Emma finally approached the microphone, the crowd fell silent. "5 years ago, my daddy was in prison for something he didn't do," she began, her voice steady and clear. "My brother Nathan had already died from cancer. I thought miracles were just stories people told to make themselves feel better about sad things." She paused, looking at Judge Thornton, who nodded encouragingly. "But then I learned that miracles aren't magic. They're just people deciding to help each other when it would be easier to give up. They're judges who learn to walk again so they can help others find their way. They're fathers who turn wrongful accusations into opportunities to help families like ours. They're communities that decide suffering should create compassion, not just more suffering." Emma gestured to the building behind her. "This center is named after my brother Nathan, but it's really named after every child who fought battles they didn't deserve to fight, every family that refused to give up, every person who donated when they could have looked away." Her eyes swept across the crowd, and many felt as if she was seeing directly into their hearts. "Nathan visits me still, sometimes in dreams. He tells me that love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes form. He says every child helped here is him being helped again. Every family given hope is our family being saved again." Judge Thornton had to wipe his eyes. After all these years, Emma still had the power to speak truth that cut through every defense. "So today, as we open the Nathan Hayes Memorial Children's Center, I want to make a promise," Emma continued, her voice strengthening. "I promise that as long as I'm alive, I'll keep helping families find hope when everything feels hopeless. I promise that Nathan's legacy, and Margaret's legacy, will live on in every child who gets treatment they couldn't afford, in every parent who doesn't have to choose between medicine and rent, in every person who learns that sometimes miracles do happen. She looked directly at Judge Thornton. And I promise to remember that the impossible only stays impossible until someone brave enough decides to make it possible. As Emma cut the ribbon, the crowd erupted in applause. But those closest saw something extraordinary. For just a moment, two translucent figures seemed to stand beside Emma, a small boy with her eyes and an elegant woman whose hand rested gently on Judge Thornton's shoulder. Then they were gone, but the love they represented remained. Judge Malcolm Thornton walked forward on his own two strong legs and embraced Emma Hayes, the child who had taught him that justice without compassion is just cruelty, and that healing requires courage to let go of guilt and choose hope. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for teaching an old cynic that miracles are real." Emma smiled, and in that smile was the wisdom of someone who had always known that love, in the end, is the only miracle that truly matters.